Well, look, none of us like to think about when things go wrong, do we? When we get disappointed with stuff, when we get discouraged, particularly if we feel we've made a mistake or, we've done something wrong. We don't like to dwell on those things. We'd rather put them behind us. We'd rather just sort of shut the door on that and move on. But I guess what I felt that God was impressing on me was there's much to be gained in just stopping and reflecting on some of those things with God's help, because he wants us to be really fruitful. He wants us to have fruitful lives. He wants us to do the things he's called us to do in our lives. But sometimes maybe there's some things he wants to teach us first. Maybe there's some he wants us to take place in order that we can really move into the things that he has for us to do. So it's not dwelling on negatives for the sake of doing that. It's really saying, hey, let's just stop a minute. Let's allow God to do the things in our hearts that he wants to do, so that we can be even more fruitful.
Yes, and you had mentioned before something about John 15, so you want to reflect on that too?
Yeah, absolutely. So John 15, Jesus is talking, he's using one of his illustrations where he says that he is like a vine. So if you imagine a vine, with grapes on there, beautiful grapes, and Jesus is saying, look, I'm like a vine, and my Father in heaven, he's like a gardener, and he's taking care of the vine. And a person skilled in looking after vines, actually, my wife and I were at a vineyard not too long ago, and we were looking at this. A person skilled in looking after vines doesn't just let it grow randomly and in all directions. It needs to be pruned. It needs to be cut in various ways, in order that the best fruit might emerge from the vine. So, Jesus says, sometimes the Father prunes the vine, whether you're fruitful or not. Actually, the Father prunes the vine, and the purpose is so that we might be even more fruitful. And he says, this is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit. And so, I found it really helpful to think, when things aren't going as planned, when things don't seem to be going at all well, maybe the Father's got his secateurs out. Maybe he's doing a bit of pruning, and that's for the good. That's so that I can be even more fruitful. The stuff I'm involved with can be even more fruitful.
What really inspired you to write the book that you wrote?
Um, yeah, do you know, someone else asked me that recently, and I'm not sure if there was a moment that inspired me to write it. I think I have often felt that I have failed a lot in things, and I mean, so for example, it might have come out of this, that when I was younger, I wanted to get into the music scene. I had this big dream. I was going to be, in fact, before I became a Christian, I wanted to be a rock star. That's all I wanted to be. I wanted to be a rock star. And then when I became a Christian, I think I wanted to be a Christian rock star. I don't think, looking back, I think that's honestly what I wanted. But I did I did want to serve God, with music, and I've written songs over the years, and occasionally use them in church, that sort of thing. But I always wanted to I had that dream that my songs would go around the world, that I'd be like, these days, we sing songs by Chris Tomlin, don't we? And Matt Redman and people like that. And I had that dream when I was a young person that my songs would go around the world, and it never happened. And I think probably I had a moment when I was just thinking about that, and maybe some other things that I had dreamed of achieving in my life,
Mhm.
and just starting to ask the question, well, how do you deal with that sometimes your dreams don't come true, or sometimes things don't work out the way you hoped.
Yeah.
Is it that actually had other plans, and there are other things that he wanted you to learn from those experiences? So it was really just really thinking about all of that, and trying to make sense of stuff happening, uh, things not working out the way I'd hoped, and trying to bring him to God and say, God, what do I do with this?
So like a lot
And
of people could relate to that book because there's a lot of people that had a lot of dreams and they didn't come true. And that's
yeah,
really heartbreaking for so many because so many will look back on their life and go, you know, I don't understand where God took me here. I don't understand what he
yeah,
was doing with me and why didn't he answer my prayer? And,
yeah,
you know, I mean, I think going through your book, I see that you learned in the book, you learned so much from your journey. Um, you made a lot of points. You reflected back a lot about
yeah,
you were a pastor at one time, and it wasn't you know, the church it didn't work out, so you had
yeah,
another opportunity. And
yeah,
how did at the time when you were going through that, do you think what were you thinking about? Were you thinking about like, did I fail? Was there something I
yeah,
did? You know, how can you help somebody that might feel like a
yeah.
failure?
No, and I think I remember those times vividly when I felt, gosh, I have really failed in this, you know, and it really sucks, you know, when you feel like you've failed or that circumstances just haven't opened those doors for you, you know, whatever reason, whether it's other people who have made those decisions or whether you feel yourself you've failed, you know, that's a tough place to be, isn't it? You know, and I think probably where God has been faithful for me is that um, you know, I never let go of God. I kept coming back to him and I kept saying, God, I don't understand this. You know, help me through this and help me make sense of this. And Lord, whatever happens, you know, I want you to be glorified regardless of what I'm going through, you know, and I think I guess that would be one message that for me is coming out of this book is that God is faithful, you know, and when stuff happens, He is faithful. But sometimes we just got to be careful that we keep pursuing Him as well, you know.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's, you know, I mean, I know other friends and other pastors who have gone through tough times and they've just walked away, you know, either they've completely walked away or they have in practice walked away, you know, in that they just spend less and less time with God and less and less time involved in church things and but I think that the message of the scriptures is we serve a God who loves us deeply, has a purpose for us, and and if we keep coming to Him, He will not fail us, and He will help us through those times.
Yes, and I have recently heard a pastor say that when we come into the earth, when God brings us in, we we are on an assignment. We have
Yeah,
a role and a duty to pursue in our life, and as we pursue God, He opens up the journey more and more to us to
yeah,
give us the will to serve
yeah,
Him and want His will in it instead of
yeah.
our own.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, you know, when we have a dream, you know, and I believe God does give us dreams, you know, to go for. I think sometimes we imagine like it's a bit like we imagine a map, you know, and we imagine this is the journey I'm going to go on. But actually, God knew all along it's a different journey. But you know, He's happy that we've taken the first step towards the dream, you know. And I think it's easy to give up when the journey takes a different direction, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's been helpful to me to realize that okay, maybe my life has taken some different directions at times, but when you look back, sometimes you think, oh, okay, I can see why I needed to go in that direction. That's really helpful, you
Yeah.
know. And so a pastor once told me that, you know, what you're doing, everything that you've done up to now is God is using that to prepare you for what you're about to do,
Yeah.
you know. And but we don't know, you know. We can have ideas of things to pursue, but we don't have the details in mind, you know. I
Yeah.
love the book of Exodus where Moses has in great detail element that must be in place for the tabernacle. He's been up
Yes.
on the mountain with God for 40 days, and it's like he has these blueprints of every measurement and everything and every piece of material for this tabernacle. But I've found in my life that God does not give me that level of detail for the things that lie ahead, And I think sometimes there's this beautiful verse in Psalm 119 where it says, your word is a lamp unto my feet, a light unto my path.
Yes.
And I love that verse because it just gives you this image of this person holding this lamp in a sort of a dark forest, and it's not a very bright light. It's just enough to take the next step. It says it's a light unto my feet. It's a light unto my path. It's not a floodlight showing you the next 5 years ahead, but it is enough light for the next step. And I think for most of us, God gives us enough light for the next step. And we may have dreams for how we think that's going to turn out, but sometimes there's a change of direction, and we just have to trust God in that.
Yeah, and I've heard so many times that there's that you if you just wait on God, His plan is better than your own,
Yeah, that's good.
right?
Yeah, that's
You
right.
just
That's right.
because we all have those dreams. So what sets your story apart in your book? Um, that because you mentioned learning about yourself a lot and your frustrations and failures. How can this help someone who struggles with ministry?
I think you do need to learn about yourself, and I think in those times of inviting the Holy Spirit into your thoughts and into your meditations, as you meditate on God's word, um, I think we do need to understand ourselves. I think one of the dangers in ministry is that we compare ourselves to other people, and which is a stupid thing to do. We know it's stupid, but we do it anyway.
Yeah.
Um, we see a person in a similar area of ministry somewhere else, and we think, well, why can't I be like that? Or why am I not as successful as that person appears to be?
Yes.
Um,
And that happens
but
a lot. That happens a lot.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think, the world often says, we need to love ourselves. And there's a half truth in that, of course. But we don't just love ourselves full stop. We're called to love God and to love others and to love ourselves. But I think, the element of truth in loving ourselves is in God's light, understanding how He's made us and who we are. And I think as the quicker we can understand who we are and how He's made us and what our abilities are and what our abilities aren't as well. I sometimes look at other ministers and think, well, I should be doing that, but actually I don't have their gifting in that area. So recognizing what I am gifted at and doing that to the best of my ability. I'd say, for anybody in ministry, really, it's discovering in God how He's made you, and particularly what your strengths and abilities are, so that you can really shine in those things.
Yes. And they say if a pastor is not called to stand on a pulpit, don't do it
Yeah, that's exactly right.
because
I think I
yeah,
think there's a slight level of crazy for anybody who stands up in front of people, and it's interesting. I mean, I actually enjoy it, so I'm obviously that level of crazy. But in my church, uh, there are a tiny handful of us who enjoy standing up in front of people. Most people hate the idea of it. I think
yeah,
part of my journey is when I was saying earlier about when I was a younger Christian and I wanted to be, really big in the Christian music scene, just realizing I'm actually not that superstar. And I'm not saying that people who go into that are superstars. That was just me. But realizing I'm not that highly successful person that I wanted to be. And yeah, I mean, sometimes when I was writing things, I wondered, is it okay to be this honest? And I thought, well, I think we have to be. I think there needs to be authenticity in the church. And if I'm struggling with something, I bet there's 100 more people out there that are struggling with the same thing. And maybe that's the message that we need to share at the moment is, hey, let's be honest with each other. Let's be honest about where we're struggling, and then we can help each other.
Yeah.
So I think that was probably the hardest thing was working out, which stories to use and how honest to be about them. I think it's that there is always hope. So I don't know if there's anybody listening that maybe doesn't relate to this because you're not a person of faith at the moment. Maybe you're not sure about whether you believe in Jesus Christ, and maybe you're thinking this is just a message for Christians. But there is hope for all of us. God made us to be in relationship with Him, and when stuff happens in life, the only way those things can make sense is by relationship with Jesus Christ. When I became a Christian, life didn't become easy. In fact, in some ways, it became a lot harder. But what God did give me was hope in any and every situation. There is always somebody to pray to. There is always a God there who can help with wisdom, help with guidance. And he's only a prayer away.
You can find Terry's book, Looking Back to Move Forward, on Amazon.com.